Welcome and greetings from Shelf Life Book Reviews Online. As always, I thank you for taking the time to watch my video. Hopefully you will find it informative, and the book that I'm about to review for you today is one you will seriously consider purchasing in the future. And that book is My Grandfather's Knife, Hidden Stories from the Second World War by Joseph Pearson. This is published by Harper Avenue, and it retails for $34.99. There have been countless books written about the Second World War, likely thousands. And although we thought we had heard and read everything about the Second World War, there are still some books that were meant to be written. And this is one of them. We could look at the Second World War in a rear view mirror and think everything's been said. But there are other smaller stories from the Second World War that are still very interesting. And Joseph Pearson has compiled a book where he takes 5 objects, including his grandfather's knife. Now, the 5 objects are the knife, a diary, a recipe book, a stringed instrument, and a small pouch. And he makes a most interesting story out of these 5. Now, the most fascinating one is a knife that belonged to his grandfather. His grandfather fought for the Canadian forces during the Second World War, and somehow the father got a knife. Actually, the ironic thing is the knife was created by a Jewish gentleman, Alexander Capel, in Solingen, which was a key manufacturing plant, and they created a lot of knives. And this knife was, taken by the Germans, and a swastika was stamped on the knife. Now, Joseph Pearson's grandfather had the knife, and Joseph said when he was younger, and this is long after the war, of course, when he saw the knife and the Nazi symbol, it always intimidated him, and it almost scared him when he looked at the knife, knowing what it signified during the war. How much were people murdered with it. And so when Joseph Pearson decided as an adult to move back to Berlin, he had a lot of items from Canada. He was living in Canada, and one of the objects that came with him that was in the packing that he didn't realize was going to be there was the knife. And even in Berlin, all those years later, the knife still, it almost held like a superstitious fascination, and it almost intimidated him to the point that it was like it was a cursed object that was in his home and in his life. And he writes about, he researched the knife and the company that created it and the gentleman who, his name was Alexander Capel. And ironically, Alexander Capel died in one of the Nazi concentration camps. He was, pretty well starved to death. And when he died, his body was just basically thrown in the pile with the rest of the bodies and likely burned. So it is a really riveting story of how he has researched one simple object, a knife, that his grandfather acquired after the war. So, but the other items that he also mentions hold a lot of fascination too, especially the stringed instrument, which was a violin. Now, violins were something that the Germans plundered during the Second World War. They went into establishments and took the violins because many of them were priceless, and they held the most value of all the instruments out there. And Joseph Pearson also talks about the violins that were very popular during the Second World War, and the Nazis got a hold of them and had this big storage area of violins. And after the war ended, the violins were rescued, basically, and were they returned to the original owners? Well, it's hard to say, but that's another fascinating part of this book, and it's really amazing how one man can take 5 objects and write a pretty well close to 300-page book on 5 objects that meant something to several people. There's a recipe book as well too that had recipes that people used during the war, during the cruelest of times. And so if you're looking for a book that's really different, if you're a war historian and think you've read it all, this book adds something else here. And My Grandfather's Night is definitely a book that you will think, wow, this is an amazing bit of research that Joseph Pearson did. So hats off to Joseph Pearson for his impeccable research. And this is definitely a book that is very highly recommended from Shelf Life. So if you do purchase it, please let me know if you agree with my review. So until we meet again, and we will, with another great book, stay safe, stay sane, and I'll see you at the bookstore. Thanks again, and bye for now.